Hi everyone, this is Syrian Girl, chemist and political analyst. In this video, we're going to analyze the blast at the Beirut port and speculate on whether Israel is responsible. We will look at the evidence, the timing of the event, the intelligence sources, the explosion itself, and the motive. You may have heard that both Israel and Lebanon denied Israeli responsibility. But the truth is, Lebanon's President Michel Aoun said the investigation into the incident will look for external interference. But I won't wait for the official results of that investigation. If there's any physical evidence of Israeli responsibility, it would have gone with the explosion. And I doubt that the officials will blame Israel, even if they suspect it, because they would then have to retaliate for this massive blast, and perhaps they're not in a position to do so. Therefore, it's perfectly reasonable for analysts to speculate. In fact, a Washington, D.C. think tank speculated that Israel was responsible for the explosion at another port in Iran last month. So if it's okay to speculate about an explosion at an Iranian port, then why not a Lebanese one? The claim is that the explosion was caused by ammonium nitrate stored close to fireworks at the port. While it's undeniable that there was ammonium nitrate and fireworks there, they were there for 6 years. The timing that the incident occurred in is what makes it more likely to be sabotage. Ammonium nitrate stores are not uncommon. They exist all over the world. Apparently, there's an ammonium nitrate store in Australia that is 4 times as large as the one that blew up in Beirut, and it's close to the city of Newcastle. The head of Safe Work in South Australia said ammonium nitrate is a low risk for storage, and that she can't imagine what happened in Beirut for such an accident to occur. You know what happened? Israel happened. Now let's get back to the timing of the event. Also, as said earlier, Iran had a series of explosions and fires over the last month. Israel's defense minister, Benny Gantz, stopped short of acknowledging his government's role in Iran's sabotage, saying only that Israel was not necessarily involved in every incident. On the 26th of June, there was an explosion at an Iranian military development base. On the 1st of July, there was an explosion at an Iran nuclear plant. On the 15th of July, there was fires and explosions at an Iranian port that destroyed 7 ships. On the 19th of July, there was an explosion at a medical center in Tehran. And on the 4th of August, there was an Iranian industrial area fire. 4th of August, the day of the Beirut blast. The analyst Andrea Stryker suggested that Iranian assets would face a summer of nuclear sabotage. When I suggested to Andrea that the Beirut blast was exactly the kind of sabotage she warned about, she denied the possibility, claiming that Israel would only do surgical strikes at Hezbollah assets. When I pointed out that Hezbollah are being connected to the Beirut blast all over Israeli media, with one article stating that it was a warning to Hezbollah, she replied, "That's not how they would do it." Well, how would they do it, Andrea? The IDF's chief of general staff said they'd strike within urban areas in their next war with Lebanon.
במלחמה הבאה אנחנו נתקוף בעוצמה את המרחב האורבני.
Andrea's excuse is that Israel doesn't desire to kill civilians. As if they don't kill civilians. They're openly ethnically cleansing Palestinians in front of the entire world. In fact, the leader of Israeli Zehut party, Moshe Feilin, said seeing Beirut's explosion gave him great joy and that it was a gift from God for Israel's Valentine's Day. Interesting timing. Not only was it Israeli Valentine's Day, it was also the same week that the results of the Rafiq Hariri tribunal were supposed to come out.
It has also been pointed out by several people that this week is the week that the international criminal courts will decide on elements of the assassination of the former Lebanese Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri.
It's indicative of the intent of someone who wants to sow havoc and discord in Lebanon. Also interestingly timed, a week of the attack, Israel was shelling the Lebanese border and a civilian area was hit. Israel is constantly breaching Lebanese airspace. As this Indian journalist who was injured in the Beirut blast says, the Israelis were flying around that area for months.
A lot of the buildings here have been bombed, just people around me bleeding everywhere, complete chaos. I mean, one doesn't want to sort of talk about who's done this yet, but death had been hovering above these skies over the last 2 months now.
She wants to say it was Israel, but she can't. It's okay, dear. I'll say what you can't. Finally, a day before the attack, Israel bombed Gaza and a Syrian intelligence gathering post in the Golan Heights, almost like they wanted to blind them from what was about to happen. But that's another piece of evidence in our arsenal: intelligence sources. In spite of the Israeli attack on the observation post, Syrian intelligence say they intercepted a lot of communication signals from Israel just before the explosion, and unusual activity at the port. Trump also got intelligence from his generals that the explosion was an attack and not an accident. It doesn't matter how many denials were issued afterwards. Trump got briefed by these generals in secret and then regurgitated what he heard back to the general public without a filter. That's what's good about him, and that's more reliable than any official denials.
A very good relationship with the people of Lebanon, and we will be there to help. It looks like a terrible attack.
I just want to follow up before I ask a coronavirus question on Lebanon. You called this an attack. Are you confident that this was an attack and not an accident?
Well, it would seem like it based on the explosion. I've met with some of our great generals, and they just seemed to feel that it was. This was not some kind of a manufacturing explosion type of event. This was seems to be, according to them, they would know better than I would, but they seem to think it was a attack. It was a bomb of some kind, yes.
Also, Lebanon's ex-interior minister said Israel blew up the port. An interior minister is responsible for policing and security, so he would know. A Lebanese intelligence source told Asia Times the Beirut explosion was no accident and Israel was responsible. Also, Israeli insider Richard Silverstein said his Israeli sources said Israel was responsible. It's clear that Israel was spying on those Lebanese ports with the intent to attack. The IDF tweeted as much in 2018. Now let's look at the explosion itself. Ammonium nitrate by itself is just an accelerant. It produces oxygen, feeding a fire or explosion. But what was stored at that warehouse was prilled ammonium nitrate, which is ammonium nitrate plus a percentage of fuel. There was 2,750 tons of it, which is equivalent to 0.4 kilotons of TNT. So at a maximum, the explosion should have been the size of 0.4 kilotons. Yet, Stratfor analysts have put the explosion size at 2.2 kilotons, and a calculation by an MIT engineer put it at 3 kilotons. If these calculations were correct, there wasn't enough ammonium nitrate to produce the explosion of the magnitude that resulted. So what could account for the discrepancy? Some kind of planted explosive? What could cause a 43-meter deep crater that ate away a section of the port? The damage would have been worse, but the ocean took about 50% of the blow. The wheat silo building took a large percentage too, and preserved a lot of the city. You can see the flashpoint before the blast. It seems to be a bit above ground. The center of the crater is also interestingly not centered at the warehouse. I also found it interesting that the blast was perfectly spherical. One thing I should mention here is that the videos circulating that show a missile hitting the port are completely fake. If you've seen one, it's fake. I have all the original videos from the blast and none of them show a missile. I will note that some of the firefighters said they heard drones or planes nearby.
من شي دقيقة صار في إطلاق بالأحرى طيارة عملت خارتين.
Another eyewitness corroborated seeing two planes.
أنا شفت طيران موجود، طيارتين مرقوا، أول انفجار وتاني انفجار، وما في كذب عيوني وصدق اللي عم بيصير.
But regardless of what they heard, there was no video of any missile. The insistence on a missile is a red herring anyway, when sabotage is already enough. First responders collecting the bodies seemed convinced this wasn't an accident.
من هو انفجار هذا صاروخ؟ لك القتلة بالأرض، رح فرجيكم القتل بعد ما حدا قرر عليهم. 1 2 3.
Unfortunately, all of those firefighters died in the blast. One of the firefighters was engaged, so the groom attended her funeral in his wedding suit. Now let's talk about motive, who benefits, and the politics surrounding the event. The US has been waging an economic war in Lebanon for the last 6 months. They've done this through extreme sanctions and control of the central banks. This caused the Lebanese currency to lose 80% of its value. The economic lifeline for Lebanon was that port in Beirut. Furthermore, the explosion caused 181 deaths, 34 of which were Syrian, 6,000 injuries, and 10 to 15 billion US dollars in property damage, leaving an estimated 300,000 people homeless. That alone caused an impact on the economy. The purpose of all this is to cause social unrest in Lebanon and have the government request aid on the condition that Hezbollah disarm. As soon as the explosion hit, while the blood was still on the streets, the mainstream media began pushing the story that a Hezbollah weapons facility was hit. The narrative was supposed to be that Hezbollah is the cause of the explosion and that international forces are needed to oust them. There's one myth I have to dispel. Hezbollah did not run that port, and they did not store weapons there. An American military contractor actually inspected that port in 2016 and noted the presence of ammonium nitrate. If Hezbollah were hiding weapons in that port, they would never have allowed an American military contractor to inspect it. Now, there's unrest in the streets of Beirut. Macron, the butcher of Paris, is spreading his tentacles all over Lebanon. He's talking about fixing corruption when he can't even fix it in France. He's sending in his warplanes to fly over Lebanese skies. US warships are also now docked at that port, and US federal agents are doing an investigation into a supposed accident in a foreign country, which is beyond bizarre, especially since Lebanon's president said he didn't want foreigners involved in it. At the end of the day, this is really just about isolating Syria, getting rid of Hezbollah so that the ever-expanding Israel can reoccupy and annex it. This has been Syrian Girl. Please subscribe for more news and analysis. And if you're able to, please support me on Patreon. I will leave you now with the tragic footage of the explosion.
The sound effect next to me, my wife is next to me. She does the sound effect.
معقول السيارات بقلبه؟ حرام ان شاء الله ما يكون حدا نصب له شيء يا رب يا رب ما يكون حدا نصب له شيء يا رب ما يكون حدا نصب له شيء ما فيهم يطفوها شو هن هول الاثنين لازم يهربوا بس ما في حدا جوات هون
In Beirut airport. I mean not airport, port. Airport.
نحن عم نعطيكم هلا الشيء لايف
نيوز
عن جد يمكن ما في غيرنا انه هيك عم نصور شو هو هيدا الصوت يا مشحرة فوت عماد فوت يا ماما يا ماما عماد فوت بليز فوت حدا يصير له شيء. تعال فوت عماد بليز فوت. تعال فوت جو انسان جو عماد فوت. سكر لي ازاز بليز.
يا عذرا I'm good.
Come. What is it?
منيح.
هون.
شو في؟
انفجار.
Maman, j'ai eu trop peur, mais je sens.
On sait pas ce qu'il y a dedans. Voilà, il faut.
انتبهي ديحوا على الاثنين.
انفجار.
Oh my god.
يلا بزيحوا على الازاز. راح تموت نانسي رو
شباب هيدا انا تحت هون، ما في بناية فوق الثاني، الله يعين العالم. هيدا البور الله بيعرف كم قتيل فيه، الله بيعرف كم قتيل فيه. ليك
فقعت